Mr. Martens.
Good afternoon. My name is Ken Martens. I'm author and historian and the vice president of Afton Historical Society Museum. And I wrote this book. It came out a year ago. It's The Perilous St. Croix River Valley Frontier. It's kind of an adventure story of the variety of cultures that existed in the St. Croix River Valley. It's about the St. Croix River's influence and the valley's influence on other communities surrounding the area. It goes back, when I started writing the book, I realized I could go back 2,000 years to the early cultures that existed, the Hopewell culture, and then advancing to the woodland and the mound building culture. And then the Oneota, which leaves the area to the Cheyenne, who are replaced by the Dakota people, who are then confronted with the Ojibwa, also the Fox or the Outagamie people lived here too, and all these cultures have come into the area and vacated the area, and it's about an evolution of cultures in the book, plus explorers and pioneering, and how all these cultures continued to evolve through in and out of the St. Croix River Valley. It turned out that I did document the rattlesnake effigy mound that's in Afton as a portion of the book there. And and also in the book, as we come into our modern era, I documented the St. Croix River as a dump. 100 years ago, they realized during the low water episode, and actually a low water episode 100 years ago meant that you could walk across the St. Croix River at Stillwater. And there are numerous times in history, in the 1870s and then in 1911 and 1935, and as recently as 1954, you could walk across the St. Croix River at Stillwater when it went low. They realized in 1911 when it went low that they uncovered all the debris they had been dumping into the river, and they didn't realize the garbage that was in there. They were shocked, and they decided, believe it or not, 100 years ago, they started cleaning up the St. Croix River when they found out it was a dump. In 1935, all the sewer systems in Stillwater, Hudson, Prescott, any town that had plumbing was dumping raw sewage. Even the Minnesota State Prison was dumping raw sewage straight into the St. Croix River, and I have a photograph of raw sewage going in at Stillwater in 1935. Also in 1935 was the year they stocked the St. Croix River with carp for sewage mitigation, and they realized that they had to clean up the river long before we ever thought of it. And so it's, and boy, when I was a kid swimming in the St. Croix River, I remember now having to dodge the floaters that kept going by, and dragging toilet paper behind it. And it was like one weekend, maybe it was 4th of July weekend, it was a busy weekend swimming out there, and man, you had to vacate the water, it was flowing so heavy. Well, in 1964, they passed the law that all the boats had to have holding tanks if they had potties on. And then 1966, they passed the Wild and Scenic River Act. In 1968, guess what? They claim that the St. Croix River is the cleanest river in the country. And it doesn't take long to regenerate the waterway. Once you end the flow of sewage, once the sewage systems are developed. And so I documented a lot of the cleanup efforts on the St. Croix in the book. And so it's been a positive thing, and I've been able to witness the cleanup of the river. You know, back in 2008, some years ago, I want to talk about the site. An archaeological survey was done as an EIS for a townhome, Afton townhome, a potential Afton townhome septic site. And Dr. Richard Rothaus came out, and I was at the archaeological dig on a 2-acre site where they plotted for 200 test holes. And they laid out a grid and to see if there was any historic habitation, significant, any archaeological remains on the site for the proposed septic drain field. And Richard Rothaus does this a lot, and he's looking at this site, and he goes, yeah, I don't think we'll find any archaeological evidence on this site. And he put the shovel to the ground right there, and first scoop of dirt comes out, something. He said, uh-oh. And it was a piece of clay pottery. And he goes, you know, that never happens. You never find evidence in the first shovel scoop. And they found the pottery all day long. And this site is on Valley Creek, just south of the proposed septic system, on the south side of the creek of the proposed Afton septic site. And they found pottery all day long. I think they dug 200 holes and found artifacts in 160 holes. And he said, this is evidence of heavy population. And I asked him, does this pottery look like it's 1,000 years old? And he goes, oh, look at the other side. What do you see? I see a pattern. And he goes, that's 1,500 years old. So there's historic evidence of long-term heavy occupation in this area, archaeologically speaking. The rattlesnake effigy mound can be dated back to the effigy builders from 1,000 years ago. It's an effigy that the Dakota people had identified as something incredibly important, and they marked it with the way they mark a historic site or an important site to them. And actually, in my book, I propose the idea, logically thinking as a Native person, that it's a Native spiritual site. And that's, if you read the law, the Minnesota Cemeteries Act, Native spiritual sites are not to be touched, disturbed, or removed for any reason. You do not touch any spiritual site. Now, how do you make the claim that it's a spiritual site? How can a snake have a spiritual aspect to it? Well, Native people as a whole understand eternal life as eternal. And a snake, as they watch it exist in nature, it will shed its skin, and it looks like there's a completely dead snake there, but a brand new snake is slithering away. And so they can take that to mean that that's proof, evidence that there is life eternal. That snake is proof of it. And so if the rattlesnake effigy qualifies as a spiritual site, you don't need to do an environmental impact study. You already have the law that says you don't disturb that site. It can be that simple. If you do proceed with an archaeological survey of the rattlesnake, the historic record at the Afton Museum states that remains have been found coming out of that rattlesnake effigy, human remains, plus the other artifacts in the area of Afton. There's numerous artifacts have been found up and down that rattlesnake area. throughout the last 100 years. And so the evidence, the historical record, is evidence that the history is there, that we're not guessing, that we don't really need a skeptical mind thought. It kind of surprised me that Dr. Richard Rothaus, who I respect very much, assumed that there was no occupation in the area. And his expert opinion was greatly mistaken. There's a funny thing came out, I guess I'm amused now, an article from Friday's Pioneer Press about Kennewick Man, who was unearthed in Washington State 19 years ago. And there was a dispute about whose bones they were because they were very old, a couple thousand, maybe 3,000 years old, and the Native Americans claimed the skeleton was of their people. And the science community said, no, it's Asian, it's Polynesian, it's Japanese. It's not, somehow these remains this person came to America and died, and he was not Native American. Well, they finally got the court cases. The tribes lost, and the scientific community did the DNA test, and lo and behold, it's a Native American skeleton remains. And so our best scientific minds in America were wrong, and the tribes were right. And so based on this historic trend that I follow these historic trends that sometimes our best experts are wrong, and that the historical record is the right record. So I guess that's the point I'd like to make about the rattlesnake effigy. It's really an important site.
Need you to wrap up, Mr. Martens, please.
Okay. I would like to help Afton promote its historic site. And if they would like to preserve it and interpret it and promote it, I think it would be better than destroy it, because I talk to a lot of people who discover an interest and discover a passion for history. And when things are missing from like when somebody burnt down the Octagon Barn in Afton, it's like, why did they do that? Why did they destroy something so historic? And I keep having to find answers, which are it's hard to answer why destruction is our second nature. And so I guess that's what I'd like to say about the area, the historic occupation of the area.
Thank you, Mr. Martens.